Hello everyone, my name is Shantanu Bhede and I am a PhD student in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Virginia Tech. Today, I am going to talk about the effect of indirect potable reuse of wastewater on rising salinity in inland freshwaters. Freshwater salinization is a growing water quality challenge globally. This is evident from long-term increasing trends in dissolved salt ion concentrations in rivers all over the world. This phenomenon is called the freshwater salinization syndrome, which results in increasing trends in specific conductance, alkalinity, and base cations. Although salinization occurs due to natural causes like weathering, atmospheric deposition, or saltwater intrusion, in recent years, human activities have contributed greatly to high salinity levels. Some examples include the use of road salts as de-icers in winter, use of water softeners to remove hardness, weathering of concrete, and other geological material due to mining and excavation, and also discharges from industrial plants and wastewater treatment plants. I will be focusing on wastewater discharges for this talk, particularly on the topic of wastewater reuse. There are two primary types of wastewater reuse. First one is called indirect potable reuse. This is a process of adding highly treated wastewater or reclaimed water to drinking water sources. The second type is called de facto or unplanned reuse. It occurs when reuse of treated wastewater is practiced, but it is not officially recognized. For example, unplanned reuse occurs when drinking water supply intake is located downstream from a wastewater discharge. A study from 2015 found that more than half drinking water treatment plants in the United States are potentially impacted by upstream wastewater discharges. In 2019, the US EPA released a draft National Water Reuse Action Plan that promotes indirect potable reuse to address water supply shortfalls over the next 10 years. So how does this all relate to freshwater salinization? Salts entering the sewage collection system or added during the treatment process are not removed by conventional wastewater treatment. Thus, this has the potential to exacerbate the freshwater salinization syndrome. We hypothesize that the contribution of indirect potable reuse to freshwater salinization is often overlooked because of two main reasons. The focus is always on mass loading of salts, and these discharges are reported as either monthly or annual averages. However, when it comes to wastewater discharges, many endpoints of human and ecological concern are concentration based, like the US EPA's criteria for in-stream chloride or the taste threshold and health advisory issued for sodium. Also important is the day-to-day variability in stream flow that can strongly influence the dilution of wastewater discharges in our freshwaters. Here we test this hypothesis by analyzing a 25-year time series of flow and measurements of sodium concentration in tributaries and in the reclaimed water that collectively drain to a drinking water reservoir. The Occoquan Reservoir in Northern Virginia acts as a source of drinking water for around 2 million people in its area. UOSA, which is the wastewater treatment plant, shown here with a red star, was the United States' first planned application of indirect potable reuse for surface water augmentation. UOSA discharges its effluent into Bull Run, which flows into the Occoquan Reservoir. Also shown on this map are two long-term monitoring sampling stations, ST45 and ST10. Flow at ST45 includes runoff from the Bull Run watershed and discharge from UOSA. Flow at ST10 includes runoff from the Occoquan River watershed. This plot shows historical sodium measurements at all main sites. Sodium concentration in the reservoir began to rise in the early 90s, and now it often exceeds both criteria of health and taste thresholds by the EPA. Due to this, Fairfax Water, which is the local water wholesaler, began exploring options to address this. It included a possible construction of a reverse osmosis upgrade, which would end up costing around $1 billion. Hence, identifying and mitigating sodium sources in the reservoir is one of the top priorities of this region. At ST45 and ST10, we had long-term data of sodium concentration measured on grab samples every 2 weeks, along with hourly stream flows. Continuous measurements of hourly specific conductance were also available at ST45. Daily average measurements of discharge were also provided by UOSA, along with measurements of specific conductance and sodium concentration on their daily flow weighted composite samples. We worked with colleagues from Fairfax Water, Fairfax County, and UOSA to identify other predictive variables besides flow and specific conductance to construct multiple linear regression models for sodium concentrations at all sites. In the first step, we generated hourly predictions of sodium load and concentrations from multiple linear regression models at each site. We then aggregated these hourly predictions to daily predictions of sodium load and concentration. In the next step, we isolated sodium load and concentration coming from the Bull Run watershed using a simple mass balance. And finally, to compare relative contributions of sodium mass loads to the reservoir, we performed a copula-based conditional probability analysis on these daily predictions. When daily predictions of sodium mass load from each source is presented as annual averages, we can see that UOSA's contribution to sodium mass loading in the reservoir is lower than that of the two watershed sources. However, annualized concentration of sodium in UOSA's reclaimed water is well above EPA's lower taste threshold, and it is also greater than concentration in flows from Bull Run and Occoquan River watersheds. Looking at these annualized results, it may seem that UOSA contributes a minor portion of sodium mass loading to the reservoir. But the story gets more nuanced when we take a look at daily predictions instead of annual averages. This plot shows daily predictions of sodium mass load and concentration from each source for a 2-year period, along with the daily average rainfall in the watershed. During periods of dry weather that are marked with vertical gray stripes, sodium mass load from UOSA's reclaimed water frequently exceeds that coming from the two watershed sources. However, during wet weather, sodium mass loads from the two watershed sources exceed that coming from UOSA's, often by 200-fold. These spikes in mass loading dominate the annual average calculations, giving us a misleading impression that UOSA's reclaimed water is a minor contributor of sodium. Consistent with the annual average results, sodium concentration in UOSA's reclaimed water is nearly always higher than that coming from the watershed sources. To further investigate the influence of weather on sodium mass loading, we applied a copula-based conditional probability analysis to daily mass load predictions and conditioned them on total discharge of water flowing into the reservoir. This is a proxy for local weather conditions. We chose 3 such conditioning events that correspond to low, medium, and high flows. This plot represents probability density functions of percent contribution of sodium mass load to the reservoir from all 3 sources, conditioned on low flow. The important feature of each curve is the range of values on the horizontal axis for which there is a non-zero probability. During dry weather conditions, UOSA contributes around 60 to 80% of the total sodium mass load that flows into the reservoir. This contribution decreases to around 30 to 50% during medium flow conditions and further down between 5 to 25% during wet weather conditions. The Occoquan and Bull Run watershed sources exhibit the exact opposite pattern. That is, they contribute a greater percentage of the overall sodium load during wet weather conditions. Thus, UOSA's contribution to sodium mass loading in the Occoquan reservoir on a day-to-day basis is highly modulated by weather and can be an important component of freshwater sodium budget. Where are salts in UOSA's discharge coming from? Multiple sources of salt are focused into a single point discharge in the form of UOSA's reclaimed water. Based on data provided by the utility, we estimated that on an annual average, Around 46% of daily sodium mass load in USA's reclaimed water comes from chemicals used in water and wastewater treatment, permitted discharge from a microfabrication facility, and from human excretion of USA's service population. The remaining 53% could come from the downdrain disposal of household products and other human activities in the sewer shed. These results for the Occoquan Reservoir indicate a conflict between two important sustainability goals: managing the freshwater salinization syndrome on one hand and increasing water security through indirect potable reuse on the other. How do we manage this conflict? One way is to apply behavioral and technological interventions to improve what we call is a region's salt productivity. Salt productivity is defined as the goods and services produced per unit of salt discharge into inland freshwaters. Some possible interventions include reducing sodium sources in the watershed, for example, through reduced de-icer application and using alternatives to road salt, enforcing strict pre-treatment requirements on industrial and commercial discharges, switching to low sodium alternatives for water and wastewater treatment methods like UV disinfection, and encouraging households to adopt low sodium products. Addressing this conflict will most likely involve implementing a combination of all these approaches, tailored to the political, social, and environmental context of each particular region. Finally, I would like to acknowledge all collaborators on this project. Thank you all for listening, and please scan this QR code to read about our project in detail. Thank you.